My name is Michael, or Kiratze Online, and this is part 2 of my beginner's guide to Duelyst. And today we are going to be looking at the factions of Duelyst, and I'll give a brief overview of each faction, just so you can get an idea of what each faction sort of excels at. The nice thing about Duelyst, though, if you're like me and you enjoy building a variety of different decks, you'll like the fact that in Duelyst you can pretty much build anything in any faction, and it's going to be at least somewhat viable. Whereas in something like Hearthstone, you're really not going to find a good face priest deck. That's just not really going to happen. But in Duelyst, things are much more varied, and you get tools in each faction to sort of build any sort of what way you want to. Now, that being said, each faction does have their own specialties and their own unique keywords and mechanics, so I'll go over those as well so you can get an idea of what you'll be up against as well as what you can be looking forward to playing. So let's just jump right in and let us look at Lionar, which is the first faction. So I'm going to turn on a crafting so we can look at every single card, even the ones I don't have. So Lionar is piloted by Argian Highmane. That is the general that you can have. That's the very first general that is out right now for Lionar. And Lionar is sort of a jack-of-all-trades class, I like to call it. Lionar and Meg Marshall are sort of the two jack-of-all-trades classes, in my opinion. They're pretty much good at a variety of different things, and they don't specialize really in one specific area. Now, the Lionar is the sort of the recommended starting deck. They just have a lot of tools, and they're not exactly a complicated class to play. Reason being is they focus on high-statted minions in terms of health, and their cards are very basic in what they do. There's not too many shenanigans, and you don't really need to know too much about Duelyst to sort of get in and start beating your opponent's face down. They do have a couple of unique mechanics and a couple of focuses on some general mechanics. For example, they focus on airdrop and celerity. But also they focus on Provoke as well. Provoke is their big one, with Silverguard Knight and Ironcliff Guardian being sort of the heavy hitters of most Lionar decks. They're just extremely good creatures. Ironcliff Guardian has airdrop and Provoke, meaning that you can put it anywhere on the battlefield, even if it's not near your general or any other minions. And it has 10 health for 5 mana and has Provoke, so it's very annoying to get rid of. Very, very tough, and Lionar values having a lot of health on a minion. They have some spells to buff as well, and because a lot of their minions have a lot of health, a lot of their buffs come in the form of you reducing the health but buffing the attack. For example, Lasting Judgment is an example of this, as well as Arclight Sentinel is sort of a similar effect but on a body as well. Now, their unique mechanic is Zeal. Zeal says gains a bonus effect when nearby your general. So when it says nearby, it means any square adjacent to that target. So if I place Windblade Adept in any of the 8 squares around me, it will gain +2 attack. So it's essentially a 2 mana 4/3, which is really, really good, really, really aggressive, and very, very nice. For another example is Silverguard Knight, which is probably going to be in pretty much every single Lionar deck. It's just such a good card for its mana cost. You're usually going to play it, and it's going to be a 3/5 4/3 with Provoke. So it's very, very, it's a very, very annoying card to deal with in the early game, since your opponent's going to have hard removal, a Dispel, a Repulsor Beast, which can move a minion away, or at least have to trade in their board to deal with it. Now, they're not just a class that can place down big creatures and just sort of place one thing at a time. They have some of the most effective removal in the game. For example, Holy Immolation is one of the strongest spells in the game. It's just a 4 mana AoE that can deal damage to the general as well and heal the minion that it targets. The nice thing about it, and what most consider the OP thing about it, is you can actually place it on a full health minion. So the minion doesn't even have to be damaged, and you still get the 4 damage AoE around that minion and dealing that 4 damage as well. So they have some extremely good removal, and they can deal with aggro as well through cards like Tempest, which deals 3 damage to everything, sort of like a Hellfire in Hearthstone. But they're not really a slower class, even though they are playing big, slow guys. They have cards like Skywing Glaives and War Surge, so you can build a pretty fast zoo type deck as well. And they have big finishers through cards like Divine Bond, which gives a minion plus attack equal to its health. So one combo you need to watch out for is if you get trapped by an Ironcliff Guardian, you might want to try and remove it or reduce its health, because next turn your opponent might play Divine Bond on it and it'll get plus 10 attack. So it'll hit you for 13 essentially, and usually probably kill you at that point in the game. So that's one of the things you have to watch out for when playing against Lionar. And Lionar also excels at protection and healing. It has a very, very efficient healing spell, which is 5 health for 1 mana. You can target yourself or a minion, which is extremely good, buffing minions' health as well, and also protecting minions through cards like Aegis Barrier. So that is Lionar in a nutshell. Valuing health, the Zeal is very, very interesting. If you like sort of bullying your opponent through minions, this might be the deck for you. The provoke cards are very annoying to get rid of, and once you have sort of your onslaught of minions by you, you can dish out a ton of damage in a single turn and start to overrun your opponent as well. So yeah, that is Lionar. Also, these are just going to be basic overviews. Again, this is a beginner's guide, so just basic overviews of each faction. Nothing advanced or anything like that, at least not yet. So next up we have Songhai, piloted by Kalios Zahn, as the first general released. And if you like Rogue or Mage or any of those spell-slinging type classes, you'll like Songhai. Songhai is very combo-oriented, likes to do a ton of different things in one turn, and huge on tempo by playing a lot of cards. You can see just by this first page, they have a lot of low-cost spells. They are very spell-heavy, and it's definitely a spell-oriented deck. For example, Blood Rage Mask is a basic card you get that says whenever you cast a spell, deal 1 damage to the enemy general. Another thing is they're inherently aggressive. They can either do... They tend to like to do bursts of damage before sort of doing a final burst to kill you off. As you can see, Saberspine Seal is a very popular card in Songhai. Just a basic 1 mana, 3 damage. So you're essentially getting 3 damage for 1 mana, which is a very, very good amount of damage just for a simple core. They also have a lot of mobility through cards like Mistwalking, and also cards like Juxtaposition to move minions around, as well as Inner Focus is a staple in Songhai pretty much. It's a very, very strong card since a lot of your combo cards, you're going to be ending up having 3 attack on them anyways. You can notice a lot of their cards are a 3 attack or less. So they're very spell oriented, burn heavy, and likes to do a ton of damage in a single turn, and very combo oriented as well. Their unique mechanic is Backstab. So Backstab, you can see there's a bracket that says Backstab and then bracket 1 and bracket. So Backstab says when attacking from behind, this deals extra damage and can't be counterattacked. So the number in the bracket dictates the extra damage that you'll get when backstabbing, and not being able to counterattack means that, well, you're not going to be able to counterattack. Normally in Duelyst, whenever you attack something, whenever you attack a minion, or whenever anything attacks anything, it's going to attack back. So, for example, if my general attacked Kaido Assassin, sure, I'd kill it off, but even if it dies, it still gets to counterattack, so it deals 3 damage. Now, that being said, Backstab, when it says from behind, placement actually matters in Duelyst. So if you're player 1, you're always going to be facing to the right, because you'll be starting on the left side, and all your minions will be facing to the right, and vice versa when you're player 2. When you're player 2, all your minions in general will be facing to the left, because you'll be starting on the right side. So you have to keep that in mind. Positioning matters, and also placing minions behind yourself to protect yourself from backstab is a very popular counter tactic against Songhai if you're sort of scared of being bursted down. That being said, they're able to burst down from very far away. They don't really have to even be near your general a lot of the times. They have a lot of mobility, so you have to be very, very careful and make sure to have quite a bit of healing in those decks if you encounter a lot of Songhais, because they usually have limited amounts of damage in their deck, but they have a lot of damage. They have some very effective removal as well, and some of the most powerful combos in the game. So if you like doing lots of damage, if you like very intricate combo type plays, you might like Songhai. Next up is Vitruvian. So Vitruvian is sort of the inherent control class in Duelyst. They have a lot of controlling cards, a lot of ways to counter your opponent's plays, and also buff your own plays as well. It has one of the strongest combos in the game through card Scion's Third Wish, which gives 3 friendly minions plus 3 attack, and Star's Fury, which summons 2/2 dervishes with Rush in front of each minion in general. Rush just means that each minion can move and attack right when it's spawned. So that's one of the strongest combos in the game. Should be nerfed. I think people are saying that Silence Third Wish should be nerfed because you're really looking at 9 damage for 3 mana, which is one of the, I think it is the strongest damage buff in the game for its mana cost. But they do like summoning a lot of creatures at once, and they like continually summoning creatures through their unique minion, which is Obelisk. So Obelisks are structures that can't move or attack, but each turn they'll spawn a 2/2 dervish that disappears at the end of your turn. So they can take over board control quite quickly early on, and they're sort of a slow rolling class. They tend to not do things a lot at once, and when it comes in terms of winning games, they'll usually do it a little bit slower than most classes. But it's one of the most powerful classes in the sense that once it actually does get board control, it's one of the toughest classes to wrestle that control away from. Oh, excuse me. Just because they get a lot of value out of their cards, and they're also one of the few classes that has quite a bit of card draw in that faction as well. But as you can see, just looking at some of these cards, like Sand Trap, for example, Blind Scorch, Siphon Energy, they have a lot of controlling spells. Entropic Decay is just straight up destroy enemy minion nearby your general. And they have like a Priest in Hearthstone. They have Mind Control through Dominate Will, which is just take control of an enemy minion nearby your general. Oh, excuse me. So yeah, that is pretty much Vitruvian in a nutshell. They can do quite a bit of burst damage, but it takes a while for them to get the cards together to do that. But as they do that, they have a lot of tools to actually take control over the game and just sort of slowly get to the point where they can burst you down with a powerful combo. So that is essentially Vitruvian. Or they can just counter all your plays and you end up just conceding because it's a very, very long game. So if you like control, Vitruvian will generally be your class. Oh, need to take a drink. Next up, we have my favorite faction and my main faction, Abyssian. So Abyssian likes death. They like sacrificing and stuff. They like doing lots of damage, and they're inherently a fairly aggressive class as well. They're able to put on quite a bit of pressure, and their spells are some of the best ones in the game, in my opinion. Their minions, not so much. Their minions need some buffs. I think there's some reworks that should be had in Abyssian. Because the one thing is their minions are very, very weak because they're very, very synergistic. Abyssian values inter-faction synergy. So a lot of their cards work really, really well together. But in a game like Duelyst as it is now, it takes quite a bit of time to set up some big plays, and most other factions have very, very effective ways of dealing with your small Abyssian minions, and especially your Wraithlings, which is Abyssian's unique token, which is just a 1/1 essentially. So it's a little bit tough to get things going with Abyssian, but it's one of those decks that once they can pull combos off, they can be some of the strongest in the game, and do quite a bit of damage as well. Their unique mechanic is Death Watch, and Death Watch says triggers whenever any minion dies, so it doesn't have to be your own. So for example, Shadow Watcher, it says gains +1/+1, so whenever anything dies, whenever any minion dies, it gets +1/+1. So you can see how powerful some of these cards are. The problem is they just take a little bit of time to get going. They do have some nice hard removal, but they also have quite a nice bit of burn as well. Usually you'll find mostly burn and aggro lists in Abyssian. They're just very, very strong. They have very, very strong attack buffs, and also Night Star Assassin is just one of the best sort of rush minions in the game, just because it's essentially 4 damage for 3 mana, which is great. And they also have a little bit of ramp if you want to play something a little slower, but playing big creatures as well. Darkfire Sacrifice is awesome for that because you usually have a lot of weak 1/1s and 2/2s that you can sort of sacrifice to put out a really, really big minion like Spectral Revenant. It's one of the best minions in the game, in my opinion. Very, very strong. It's definitely one of the best Abyssian cards, that's for sure. It's a very, very strong legendary, essentially being able to kill off something, deal 4 damage to the enemy general, and usually it sticks around to do something else as well, forcing hard removal or just gets extra damage in there. So a very, very good card. right there. So that is pretty much it. They also have a sort of a unique. They have another unique mechanic. Some factions have more than others. Their Abyssian has also Shadow Creep. So Shadow Creep is an interesting one because it's a tile mechanic. So, for example, Abyssal Crawler or Dying Wish turns this space into Shadow Creep. So whatever space this is standing on and it dies, it'll turn it into a Shadow Creep tile. So you'll be able to determine Shadow Creep tiles by the way they look. They'll have spikes coming out of them. And then you have in Abyssian other cards that interact with it. For example, Shadow Nova turns a 2/2 area into Shadow Creep. And then Shadow Creep says deals damage equal to the number of Shadow Creep spaces at the end of the owner's turn. So it's a very slow mechanic, but once it gets going, you can end up bursting down with Shadow Nova if you play things properly. Shadow Nova or Shadow Creeps sort of needs a rework in my opinion. It's a little bit tough to get off, and the Shadow Nova decks are very, very slow and clunky a lot of the times. And because Duelyst has some very, very fast decks, you usually don't end up getting any. You don't even sometimes even get to play Shadow Nova because the games have just gone on too fast, and you just end up dying beforehand. But Abyssian I think Abyssian is still a very, very fun class. Their spells are really, really good. And they have some very, very interesting synergies that once they get going, they tend to take over games fairly fast. Next up is Meg Marshall. So Meg Mar is the other sort of jack of all trades deck, similar to Lionar, but better. Magmar is what some consider the OP class because they're pretty much good at everything. They have a very, very powerful minions and also powerful spells. They have some of the best. They have the best removal in the game, actually, the best AoE removal, great single target removal, and to sort of counteract that, their cards are generally a little bit higher. Their spells are generally a little bit higher costing, but because of their power level, even still, Control Magmar is sort of a premium control deck you'll encounter. They can, just with all the healing in the game and the removal that they have, they tend to be able to last fairly easily to be able to get to some of their powerful minions. Silithar Elder is going to be a staple in pretty much every Control Magmar deck you encounter, unless they couldn't craft it. It's one of the strongest minions in the game, and once it gets going, if you have no way to deal with it that turn, and you have no really good removal for it in your deck, you probably should just concede, because you're probably not going to win that game. It essentially is an 8/8 that at the end of your turn you get an egg, which is going to spawn into another one of these, and it sort of snowballs, and you pretty much can fill up a whole board with these guys if the game goes on long enough. But they have very, very powerful minions that have very, very powerful effects. Spirit Harvester is a good example of that one. And Macantor Warbeast is one of the best cards in Magmar. You can do a huge amount of damage and AoE to the general, and also pretty much clear out anything that's nearby. But yeah, it's tough to say exactly what they excel at, because they pretty much do everything very, very well. They have good single target removal, good AoE removal, big powerful minions. They even have ramp in their deck already, and big buffs. Yeah, not much to say. Magmar is a super strong class. Their unique mechanic is Rebirth. So Rebirth says when it dies, it leaves behind a 0/1 egg that hatches into the same minion at the end of your next turn. So it's really, really tough when your opponent's going 1-for-1 and you place this down and they have to spend 2 resources to actually fully get rid of it. Otherwise, it just comes back again. So very, very annoying to deal with. But generally, if you have a fast enough deck, you can sometimes burst down Magmar. They do have a very, very strong heal through Earth Sphere, but they're not always going to have it. Otherwise, Magmar is really, really, really tough to deal with once it sort of gets going, and if the game goes on too long. You can still play fairly aggressive Magmar lists, though, but Control Magmar is the most popular one. And last up, we have Vanar. So Vanar is the most recently added faction that was added in beta, and Vanar is very big on tempo and having a lot of minions on the board. They have the unique minions through walls, which are just sort of like structures, but they can come with effects as well. For example, summon 3/0/2 Vesper walls. Minions that attack these walls are stunned. You also have ones like Blazing Spines, which summon 2 3/3 walls that can attack. So they're big on influencing the board state and trying to pressure through where your minions in general are, because they have two sort of ways to interact with the halves of the map. For example, their unique mechanic is Infiltrate. So Infiltrate says gains a bonus while on the enemy side of the battlefield. So, for example, Crystal Cloaker is it's a staple pretty much in every Vanar deck. It's essentially a 4/3 for 2 while it's on the enemy side of the battlefield. So they're big on trying to force you on either side of the battlefield, because if you push to their side, and your Infiltrate minions are active, they'll want to try to get to the other side. And if they get to the other side, you have a card called Avalanche, which says deals 4 damage to all minions and generals on your starting side of the battlefield and stun them. So the only way to avoid those fully is to just stay in the middle of the map, but even still, that doesn't fully work. But they're huge on tempo. They have some very effective removal through sort of almost pseudo dispelling. Through turning them into aspects, which turns them into different minions. For example, Aspect of the Fox is a very, very popular card. It just transforms any minion into a 3/3 Ravager with no abilities, meaning you can change one of your guys into a 3/3 to get a little bit of extra damage in, or you can, for 1 mana, you can transform a different minion, an enemy minion that has a super powerful effect. It's sort of like a Dispel almost for Vanar, but they're big on tempo and big on sort of board positioning and board pressure. Hailstone Prism is one of the best cards in Duelyst. It's just a 2 mana return any minion to its action bar, so it's a bounce spell, so you can see how they're sort of big on tempo there. But because Duelyst, you're drawing 2 cards of return, a lot of the time you can find your opponent at 6 cards, and it's sort of like a 2 mana kill spell at that point. So it's it's very, very nice. Now, they're a little bit tough to get going. If you can deal with a lot of their threats, they're they rely a lot on their minions. If they don't have any minions on the board, they're very, very weak. So if you tend to keep board control against Vanar, you'll generally win. The problem with Vanar is they have very few ways of bursting down other than Razorback. So if you find your opponent setting up quite a few minions and just you feel like they're setting up for a big card, Razorback's probably going to be the game ender. So if you can control the board, though, it makes cards like Razorback sort of a dead draw. But it's all about sort of board positioning, tempo, and getting to a point where you can use some powerful combos to finish off your opponent with Vanar. But yeah, that is pretty much Vanar as well. So if you like tempo style decks and a little bit faster decks and a lot of synergy as well, similar to Abyssian, they have a lot of interfaction synergy through they're the only faction that actually has a sort of a race or a tribal in that faction. Vespers are their tribal. They're the only faction, I believe, that has a tribal in the faction. There's other tribals, but they're in neutral. Vanar's the only one with their own tribal minion. And they have some big synergy on that as well through cards like Glacial Elemental and Cryogenesis, for example. But that is it. Those are the factions. Just a very brief overview of each faction. Nothing too special, but hopefully you got a better idea of some of the cards that each faction plays and sort of their general play style. Like I said, though, you can build pretty much anything in any faction, so have at it. Look at the cards in the crafting section and see what interesting decks you can come up with. Also hit up the forums as well, because there's always new decks being posted and some very, very interesting ones that hit the forums as well. But until next time, guys, I'm not sure what I'm going to do for my next part of this guide. Maybe we'll go into the gameplay and work on stuff like positioning and things like that. But until then, I hope you guys have a great night, morning, day, wherever you are. Thank you for watching, and I will talk to you guys later.